1, Chapter 8,
Development of state concepts. Before, states and regions were just divided among kingdoms, empires, and city-states. Ancient states would used to have walls surrounding its borders to protect from intruders and keep agriculture in touch. Now, they do not have walls that much. They are mostly spread out and are between China and Taiwan. Taiwan is considered a sovereign state because of how independent it is from China's government and culture, as well as the Arctic. No one really owns it. It's mostly separated into different regions of different countries. The United Nations. The United Nations promotes international cooperation between different countries. The UN all started after World War II with only 51 members, including sovereign states. Now the number of members have increased to 193. Now before the UN, there was an attempt to make peace happen between countries called the League of Nations, but that did not work out. The UN takes care of peace and war.
Issue 2. Why are nation-states difficult to create? Nation-states and multinational states, a multi-ethnic state, a state with more than one ethnicity. Since not a single state is 100% one ethnicity, every state in the world is considered a multinational state. States, which is filled with diversity. A multinational state is a country with more than one ethnicity, with traditions of self-determination. For example, Denmark and Greenland, independent nation states in former Soviet republics. The Soviet Union considered of one of 15 republics coming from the 15 largest ethnic Soviet nation. Colonies. A colony is territory legally tied to Soviet state rather than being independent. For example, the Europeans. Remaining colonies are only a handful, estimated to 68 places. One of the most populous is Puerto Rico, and most of other colonies are in islands in the Pacific Ocean. Central Asia states include Turkmenistan with 85%, Uzbekistan with 80%, Kyrgyzstan with 69%. Kyrgyzstan included 67 Kyrgyzstans. Last for the 5 Central Asian states includes Tajikistan with 80%, Taj, largest multinational state, Russia. Russia recognizes 39 ethnic groups as nationalists, taking on to terminal in the Caucasus. Caucasus is home of many ethnics, with Azeris, Armenians, and Georgians. Soviet Union breaking up regions into independent countries. Regions, ethnics have very success in.
State is separated by a boundary, which is an invisible line that marks the extent of a state's territory. I got hooked. But historically, it was not a boundary that separated states, it was a frontier, which marks the extent of a nation's zone. No boundary is better, except for the one that affects all types of things. But there are 2 types of boundaries, physical and cultural. Physical is self-explanatory, but there are 3 types. Desert, as you can see here with our little man who died, are hard to cross and they're significantly hot and deadly. And a good example is the Saharan Desert in Africa. The final type of physical boundary is water, which is more of rivers, lakes, and oceans, just like the Pacific Ocean. The territory varies because we get 200 nautical miles. The rest is international zone. But this is the most common type. These are good because you could see them aerially through maps and images, and you could see them physically, but only when you're close to them. These are good for protection from other invading countries. There are 2 types of cultural landscapes, one being geometric, which is basically a straight line going across on a map, and ethnic, which is separated by ethnicity, religion, and language. But first we're going to talk about geometric. A good example of geometric is the Iozu Strip, which is in between Chad and Libya. This is a 600-mile strip that blocks them both, which was made in 1899 by the British and French forces, which was later taken on in 1973 by Libyan army, but was then seized by Chad and French armies in 1987. Ethnic boundary is a boundary that's separated
by ethnicity, religion, and language, and a good example of this is the island of Cyprus. The upper half of the island is ruled by Turks and is 18% of the island's population, and the bottom half is ruled by Greeks, which is 78% of the island's population. In 1960, the island won its independence from the British, and after that, both Greeks and the Turks had a war over minorities. In between this war, the UN decided to bump in and make a wall in between to prevent things. But over the recent years, both nations came, both nations, both ethnicities came together, and part of the wall was demolished. So states have different types of shapes, and there's 5 different types. The first one is a compact state, but Africa doesn't really have one. But in reality, it's a state that's in a circular shape, but with the center in the middle, or its capital. The size doesn't really vary, but the state isn't always that peaceful. The second type of state is a perforated state, or a state that has access to water. And a good example of this is the Congo. Right here, it leads all the way to the ocean. Alright. Another type of shape is elongated state, which is like Chile, Gambia, Togo, and Benin. But these don't really have good communication, and the center, they try to put it in the middle.
Chapter 8, Key I-4. A good example of states competing and aligning with each other is the Cold War. The Cold War was in the early 20th century. The century powers were Austria, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Russia, the UK, and the USA. So after World War II, powers became unbalanced, leaving 2 superpowers, the USA and the Soviet Union. Russia starts sending troops to countries to protect them, and the US does the same with Grenada, Dominican Republic, and Panama. They were using powers in states that weren't even theirs, but they were using to build military and standing powers. In the 1960s, a Cuban Missile Crisis occurred where the USA was wondering why Russia, or the Soviet Russia, was going to Cuba and building missiles. Cuba is only 90 miles away from Florida, so that's why they were concerned. And the cooperations in Europe were NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Okay, now we're going to talk about the European Union. The European Union was founded in 1958 by Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, West Germany, and more joined after the fall. The European Union gives subsidies to farmers and helps struggling regions. They also have common currency, which is the euro. You could go anywhere in Europe and use a euro. And they have a common language, which is English, so they all speak English. But in 2016, they had the Brexit, which was a big deal, because the UK voted to leave the EU, and they decided to leave because they had cultural frustration, and they had economic issues. They had to pay to be in the EU, and the currency left the country, so it was like bad for them.